Jalen Polk could be the New Orleans Saints' secret weapon at wide receiver.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm introducing you to three underrated contributors for the New Orleans Saints going into 2026. We'll take a look at how second-year defensive tackle Vernon Broughton can bring some hope to the run defense. We'll also dive in with a look at Isaiah Stalbird, who could be the Saints' next big chess piece on the defensive side of the football. But we're going to kick everything off with a player that the Saints didn't get an opportunity to see and knew that when they acquired him in 2025, wide receiver Jalen Polk, and how he could end up being their secret weapon at wide receiver in 2026. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for helping us get here as we bring you your team every day. New Orleans Saints wide receiver Jalen Polk could be the Saints' big secret weapon going into 2026 at wide receiver. There's been a lot of conversation around that position here over the course of the offseason, and we expected that. The Saints have Chris Olave, they have Devaughn Vele, and then after that, they have a room of guys that the Saints need to kind of still figure out, right? Mason Tipton has been a training camp stud for 2 years in a row, but never really caught on in the regular season. Trey Palmer was acquired via waivers before the season began. Former LSU wide receiver, former Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver, but an injury ended up shutting down his season. And then you have other players like Dante Pettis, Kevin Austin Jr., and others, Ronnie Bell, Samari Toure, who ended up helping this team all throughout the season last year. We'll see which one of them ended up being back in 2026, but the hope around Jalen Polk remains, and I think is warranted. The 6'1", 203-pound wide receiver has NFL size and was a highly rated wide receiver coming out of Washington in the 2024 NFL Draft, where he was drafted number 37 overall, so just outside of the first round. He unfortunately, though, ended up with a New England Patriots team that was not very good in 2024, and he did not become a major contributor in that offense. No one did. The wide receiver had just 12 catches for 87 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns during that time, so getting 2 receiving touchdowns on just a sixth of your passing receptions is pretty solid there. But I do think that there is a lot more on the way when it comes to Jalen Polk. And if you go back to his collegiate days, you can see the hope there. 143 receptions over the course of his career, spent 3 years at Washington, 1 year at Texas Tech before that. 2,231 receiving yards and 18 touchdown catches all throughout, while hauling in a little bit over 50%, I think it was 51% of his contested catches all throughout the season, or all throughout his career, rather, whether it be with Texas Tech or Washington, right, during his collegiate days. Now, I think, though, the thing that really separates him is exactly that quality. He is a physical guy who will make plays at the catch point. He's got really, really good body control. He's got good ball skills. He understands how to track. He is a very physical player as a run blocker as well. Good enough of a build to help you out there at 6'1", 203. Maybe a little bit stockier than people think that he is. Maybe a little bit stronger than people think he is. He's got really, really good focus. Some of his catches during his Washington days were absolutely off the charts on the tape, because he looks like he shouldn't even be able to track where the football is, but he ends up finding a way to get under it anyway and then hauling it in, and does really well in sort of jump ball situations too. He's aided, of course, by a 37.5 vertical leap and a really powerful lower body that gave him that 10-foot 9-inch broad jump. Doesn't have really incredible speed, right? He's not a 4.4, 4.3 guy. He's a 4.5-2 guy, and he's coming off of an injury that kept him out for that 2025 season. And so now you'll have to see kind of what that speed looks like going into 26. But everything about the body control that he has, his ability to stay committed, his route running ability, his comfort in jump ball situations, all of that will very likely still be very present for a Jalen Polk and could be really useful for a New Orleans Saints team that's trying to figure out what that mold of wide receiver ends up looking like that fills out the rest of their wide receiver room. You have the big-bodied wide receiver now in Devaughn Vele, who showed you that he can attack deep, but also that he can work the short intermediate areas and attack the middle of the field, making some physical catches there. Got to stay healthy, got to stay on the field. Obviously, that's going to be a big part of the conversation for him coming out of that second year, but all signs point to him being able to do that. Then you turn around and you look at Chris Olave, who only missed one game at the end of the season, and it was because of a blood clot, which is not an injury-related thing, and had a career year with 100 catches, over 1,000 yards, almost 10 touchdowns, had 9 touchdowns there, became only the second New Orleans Saints pass catcher player in the franchise's history to cross the century mark when it came to reception. So what is the best type of wide receiver that can line up and help that team in those situations? That's got to be the next big thing that the Saints get to figure out. And yeah, look, finding a guy like a Jordan Tyson in this year's NFL draft is a great way to go about it because he has the versatility to line up outside, line up inside. He can run the route tree. He has really good separation ability, particularly as the ball is closing in on him. Always finds some way to get some extra space. But having another player that you're able to move around, like Jalen Polk as well, who played over 41% of his snaps in the slot during his final year over at Washington, which was a productive year that ended up getting him over 1,000 yards and ended up helping him get drafted, moving him up, caught over 63% of his passes during that season as well. His ability to move around could be a huge asset for New Orleans. So you have the physicality, the ability to move around, right? You play him in the slot, you play him out wide. The pretty solid route running, and he, the suddenness, I think, will getting him some more work with Keith Williams, I think will help him out quite a bit, helping him and getting him some work with guys that move very fluidly, like Devaughn Vele as well as Chris Olave. I think that will help for him, and just the overall go get it, my ball nature and mentality with which he plays, I think is an interesting combination to add to the gumbo of the Saints wide receiver room. That doesn't mean that you don't also go out there and draft a wide receiver, but it could be a really good thing if New Orleans gets solid play out of Devaughn Vele, star level play out of Chris Olave, drafts a wide receiver that comes in and contributes, whether that wide receiver is drafted in the first round, second round, third round, whatever, but gets a wide receiver in the draft that ends up coming in and contributing. And then you add in some contributions from Jalen Polk. That's a pretty solid wide receiver room. I'm not out here trying to say that Jalen Polk could be, is going to turn out to like eclipse Chris Olave or be the number 2 opposite Chris Olave. I think Olave and Vele are actually a pretty solid 1 and 2, right? Or X and Z. And I like that pairing for New Orleans, but I see a desire, an understandable one, to continue to add to the room. And so what if some of what you get out of that room comes from somebody that's already in the room, but you haven't gotten an opportunity to see yet? Trey Palmer, as well as Jalen Polk, have the ability to contribute there. And so let's say that your wide receiver room is Chris Olave, Devaughn Vele, Trey Palmer, Jalen Polk for next year, and a rookie. Could be Carnell Tate. Could be Thomas Brazel out of Tennessee, a second or a third round pick. Could be Elijah Surratt out of Stanford, a second or a third round pick. Could be a Zachariah Branch or a Skylar Bell, these incredible yards after catch guys in day 2 out of Texas A&M and UConn, respectively. That's a pretty solid room of 5 wide receivers that you can get there. So that's where the secret weapon of Jalen Polk comes in, is that he could help you fill out that wide receiver room and be a player that you can actually rely upon, not just if somebody gets hurt, but rotating in and actually going out there and making some physical plays for you in terms of being able to line up anywhere on the field and run routes. Coming up next, speaking of lining up anywhere on the field, I don't think that phrase will encompass just Taysom Hill much longer, because over on the defensive side, they've got a Swiss Army knife themselves now, the New Orleans Saints do, and linebacker Isaiah Stalbird. Let's take a look at how he could contribute his second year as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. Just like the New Orleans Saints are looking to figure out who's going to be able to fit in and contribute to their business going into 2026, you as a business owner might be looking for the same. That's where Indeed comes in, especially Indeed sponsored jobs. They're going to help to make sure that you don't just get stuck with folks that maybe check some boxes on the resume but aren't good fits, they're going to make sure that they check every box for you by giving you that prime positioning that your job deserves right at the top of the page, so you don't have to worry about getting lost in the sauce any longer. According to Indeed's data, sponsored jobs posted directly to Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing the candidates that check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results by using Indeed sponsored jobs. And right now you can get $75 in sponsored job credit to give your job that premium positioning that it deserves by heading over to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. It's Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints have another Swiss Army knife on their roster, and while it won't necessarily be on the offensive side, it's a player that can still absolutely be an underrated contributor going into 2026, especially considering how his position room might pan out, and that's linebacker Isaiah Stalbird. Let's dive into that here as we continue to look at some underrated contributors for 2026. We appreciate you, as always, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show. Don't forget, as an everydayer, you can also join the Everydayer Club. $5 a month. You get all of our shows ad-free here on Locked On Saints, including our squad shows. You also get access to our Discord server, which is growing and getting more fun. I'd love to have more people in there to chop it up with. $5 a month, you can get in on all that. $15 a month, you can join All Access. We just put out a couple of All Access episodes this week, gave you some early looks at what's going on with the Derek Carr situation, and even took a look at why the New Orleans Saints should consider pursuing David Njoku, the former now Cleveland, or soon to be former Cleveland Browns tight end. So if you want all that, just click the link in the description and check out our Everydayer Club. The other underrated contributor that I think could be on the way for New Orleans is Isaiah Stalbird. This is a guy that I've been high on for quite some time. My good friend John Hendricks, who you can hear on the squad show with us as well, he's always been really high on Isaiah Stalbird too. I think that he is a player that in Brandon Staley's defense specifically, can have a unique role for his career moving forward, and certainly for this 2026 season. And so I look at Isaiah Stalbird, this 6'1", 215-pound linebacker, former safety, defensive back player, as a really interesting chess piece for this New Orleans Saints defense. And depending upon some potential changes that can happen at various positions on this defense, Stalbird could be in for at least a larger role in 2026. The role that he played in 2025 was also very limited. So having a larger role is not a huge bar to clear here, right? He played in only 6% of the Saints defensive snaps in 2025. And most of those snaps, according to our friends over at True Media, were on third downs. So for instance, if you look at the snap counts from like Pro Football Reference as well as Pro Football Focus, he had 63, 64 total snaps on defense throughout the 2025 season. According to our friends at True Media, 50 of those snaps were on third down, and 31 of those snaps were on 3rd and 7 or longer. So he was there to aid as a coverage or pass rush player at the second level, and he did both of those jobs pretty stinking well. He is somebody that can cover, but he's also somebody that can put pressure on a passer because he has really, really good speed, especially for the position, and has a lot more strength than I think most people who try to block him realize that he has based on that 6'1", 215-pound frame. And who can blame them? You get a defender rushing the passer, getting into the backfield, mixing it up with offensive linemen and, fullbacks and tight ends and running backs and everything. And there's an expectation like, oh, I'm going to be able to clean this guy up. And then all of a sudden he's got you off your feet or he's, running past you and jumping over your quarterback, getting back up, turning around and sacking the quarterback afterwards. One of the best sacks I've ever seen up against the Atlanta Falcons on Kirk Cousins there. And so I think that there's some unique elements to his game that make him a pretty active contributor because of the active nature of his play. But his role was very limited in 2025. It could become far more engaged and far more present during the 2026 season. 25 combined tackles, 2 of which were for a loss. He had a pair of sacks, almost had 3, but had a pair of sacks and also had on just 14 pass rushing snaps, by the way, to get those pair of sacks. And he also had like a pass defense as well. And so this is now a player that you see a lot of versatility with. He can drop back in coverage. He can rush the passer. He can play the run. There's a lot of different things that he can do. In fact, actually, it was highlighted by Demario Davis. Let me read you a quote from Demario Davis that he said during the season about Isaiah Stalbird. He said, "I'm a big fan of Isaiah. He just continues to get better and better. I think that coming in and transitioning to linebacker with a defensive back background, it lends itself to, well, playing fast was a big part of it. It lends itself well to playing fast, excuse me. Being able to cover guys, but also being able to be an all-around backer and have productivity as a blitzer, being able to stop the run, and he continues to show up in ways that coaches feel comfortable putting him on the field," is basically what he was saying. He said putting you in, but the reference there is putting him on the field. So I think that that is a really, really good scenario, a really good setup for a guy like Isaiah Stalbird, who could see his upcoming role in New Orleans dictated by departures. Because he has shown you that if you put him on the field, he can have an impact. And he's shown you, too, that you can put him on the field in a bunch of different places. You can put him at linebacker on the weak side. You can put him at linebacker on the strong side. You can line him up as a stand-up pass rusher off of the edge. You can line him up in the slot. He has safety experience. In fact, Marcus Robertson, before he left, after Dennis Allen was fired, they moved Isaiah Stalbird in 2024 from the linebacker room to the safety room, and he practiced there for the rest of the season. And that was after they used all of his elevations where they could have moved off of him. That was his rookie year as an undrafted free agent coming out of South Dakota State. Go Jackrabbits. And so now he has this chance in this really kind of amorphous, multiple disguise-heavy defense that is the Brandon Staley system, could be right at home for a guy like Isaiah Stalbird. Let's say Demario Davis departs, and then the Saints would end up bumping up some of these linebackers, and I'm sure they would invest in the position, right? Quay Walker in free agency, or go to the draft, guys like Jacob Rodriguez or Jack Kelly, either one of those guys, Bryce Boucher out of Oregon, like any of those guys would be fantastic additions for the Saints. Sonny Styles in the first round, like there would be a lot of different ways for them to address linebacker if they wanted to do that. But also, you still have Pete Werner for another year, probably, maybe two. You still have Danny Stutzman, who's going into his second year, a guy that's not an underrated, about to be a contributor, but could potentially be a breakout player for you in 2026. And then now Isaiah Stalbird, who would be able to get mixed in. Let's go a step further. It's not just the linebacker room where he can contribute. His versatility could potentially serve well in the slot. What if he ends up being one of the guys along with Jonas Sanker and Quincy Riley and Beanie Bishop and Julian Blackman? What if he's one of the guys that ends up getting a run at the star role if Alontae Taylor departs to go and play as an outside corner if a team's willing to pay him to do that? That could be an excellent role for him too, because he can cover, he can tackle, he can rush the passer, right? And at 6'1", 215, he'd have really good size on the insides where he wouldn't get, he wouldn't be a small slot guy. So for me, Isaiah Stalbird, absolutely a player to watch that could have a big time impact and watch his role grow in 2026. Another player coming back from injury this time that could have a big role is Vernon Broughton. Let's break him down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The winter games are here, and you know you want to get in on all of that action, and there's no better place to do it than with FanDuel today. You can get in on things such as medal counts or even individual events as well. Find those games that you know that you love and get in on those. You can also bet for the U.S. They're number 2 right now in odds for the most gold medals. They're number 2 right now in odds for the most total medals received. You can get in on that and check out speed skating for the races that are decided by inches, the hockey games that feel very different right from the opening face-off, to all those niche events that you might like as well. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with FanDuel today. With FanDuel, where you can play your game. Visit FanDuel.com today. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. Play your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints could see a big boost to their run game and their defensive line with the return of third-round pick Vernon Broughton in 2026. Once again, we thank you very much for making us your first listen and being an everydayer here. Make sure you check out the Everydayer Club in the description below. And don't forget, we're publishing 2 episodes a day now. So make sure you go back to yesterday's episode where we took a look at free agent and draft kind of pairing scenarios to see the best case scenarios out of 2 that we presented for running back and wide receiver. Make sure you go back and check out our quick episode from yesterday evening on that. So the Saints drafted former Texas Longhorns defensive tackle Vernon Broughton last year in the 3rd round, and they only got 1 game to really get an idea of what it is that he might be able to do before in that week 2 game, he ended up suffering a season-ending hip injury that sent him to injured reserve for the rest of the year. And I think for the Saints, there is some optimism around what it is that Vernon Broughton could potentially turn into once he gets more opportunities out on the field. There's obviously a connection there. Defensive line coach Bo Davis worked with him with the Texas Longhorns, and both of them were there during their collegiate days. And so there appears to be a lot of belief in terms of what it is that Vernon Broughton can bring. He had 6.5 sacks over the course of his career as a defensive tackle. That's solid in college. 11.5 tackles for a loss. So he was somebody that proved that he could be disruptive during his time, during his collegiate days, but also proved that he could help in the run game as well. A solid tackler and a good run defender. We saw that be a big focus over the course of the Saints draft class in 2025 was getting those reliable tacklers, guys like Jonas Anker, Danny Sussman, Vernon Broughton. Here's what General Manager Mickey Loomis had to say at the end of the season in his and Kellen Moore's interview press conference, where he brought up Vernon Broughton. He said, all of these guys have really stepped up and have done a great job. They've been professional about the way that they've approached their craft. Even Vernon Broughton, who we didn't get a chance to see a lot of because he got hurt pretty early, I think that we're excited about his prospects. So there's some excitement there. And I know, I get it. Like, oh, Ross, of course he's going to say that about defensive, about a pick that he and his staff made. But here's the thing. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to say diddly poo at all if he didn't want to. And so for the Saints, who only saw 33.8% of him, or saw him on 33.8%, of their defensive snaps in week 2 up against the San Francisco 49ers, they saw him come through with 3 total tackles and liked what it was that they were able to bring to him. He had good pursuit on those 24 plays that he played. We're not talking about somebody that's going to revolutionize a defense here, playing 24 snaps and what it is that the expectations can be around that. But as a player that could potentially add and contribute to something that the Saints took a big step forward in 2025, he's going to be worth watching once he gets back out onto the football field, whether that's during training camp or whatever. I'm going to be honest, he didn't stand out a ton during training camp his rookie season. And so getting to see him out on the field was going to be a pretty exciting opportunity because he didn't really catch your eye as a defensive tackle during training camp where there's no, tackling and the physicality is not the same. And yeah, they put the pads on and it gets really physical, but it ain't football, right? Like, it's still training camp. And so I think all of that to say that while he didn't necessarily catch our eyes all throughout training camp, an opportunity to get to see him out on the football field with a growing and budding defensive unit, I do think would go the right way for him. And he's going to be able to contribute here, right? I mean, behind Brian Brzee, the Saints still have a lot to figure out when it comes to the interior of their defensive line. I expect that to be a place where they're pretty active over the course of this offseason, whether that be via free agency or through the draft. But having Devaughn Gottschalk for another year could be helpful for them. Adding in Vernon Broughton could be helpful for them. Figuring out what else they have and some of these other players that have contributed there, right? Nathan Shepard had a really, really strong season last year. Just got better and better and better as the season went on. Is he back next year? Does that end up being kind of like a Tano Passanio situation to where, like, yeah, just want to be a year early on this rather than a year late? I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in terms of the roster build in the middle of the defense. How much does John Ridgeway really get an opportunity to come back and try to contribute some more? And so for New Orleans, I do think that getting a guy like Vernon Broughton back could be big. And I also do think that continuing to add this defensive tackle room could be big as well. We've seen in the last 2 Super Bowls just how important a really disruptive interior offensive line can be in the biggest moments of a season. That's the point A to point B fastest way to get after and disrupt an opposing quarterback's rhythm. And so for New Orleans to be able to get Vernon Broughton back, who does also have some contributions he can make in the pass rush game just as much as he can potentially make some contributions in the run game, it's all there for him. And so if he can find a way to be able to contribute there, I think that it could be a very, very good fit for Broughton, for the Saints, and figuring out kind of how things can further entrench there. The Saints improved as a run defense. They went from the 31st ranked run defense at the end of the 2024 season to being the 19th ranked run defense at the end of the 2025 season. Are you groundbreaking at that situation? No, you're still in the bottom half of the league. There's no doubt about that. I understand that. But that's good progress. I mean, the other years before that, they were trending in the wrong direction. They were going the opposite direction. They were going from a top-ranked passing or rushing defense to kind of mid-teens to 20s to late 20s to the 31st team and one of the worst rushing offenses we've seen in the league that we saw in the league 2 years ago. And then all of a sudden, they were very respectable under Brandon Staley. And honestly, it was really off to a slow start for them. Right? Early on, that's where a lot of the rushing yards came against them, despite the fact that they saw what would that be, 32, 31, 30, the third fewest rushing attempts against them in 2025. So I think that when you saw them, first of all, putting more points on the board, but then also you saw them settling into the system, winning with their scheme and with their matchups, you saw that run defense get stronger and stronger and stronger throughout the season. And so maybe adding a guy like Vernon Broughton, who's proven in that area, but also adding a guy like Vernon Broughton, who can be a bit disruptive as a pass rusher, could be a really good change of pace or additional piece to go to that defensive line rotation. He ain't going to be able to do it all by himself, but as a rotational player, he'll be worth a watch. All right, fam, time for a little bit of lagniappe here for you. And I want to just throw in one more kind of underrated contributor going into 2026. And I'm going to give a shout out to our guy, kicker Charlie Smyth. This is a guy whose story we followed for the past couple of years. One of the best stories in football, going from Irish born, working to be a teacher of English language, was going to grad school for that. And then just over 2 years later, he's an NFL kicker, sinking his first ever NFL kick, which was the third longest field goal for a debut, while also in that same game simultaneously kicking and recovering an onside kick, one of only 5 that were recovered in all the 2025 season. And now going into 2026, he's going to have a pretty big role ahead of him. Still converted just over 70% of his kicks. And so you'd like to see the kick conversion tick up a little bit for him going into his next year. But I know that this is a guy that's working really hard. I believe he's going back to, he went home for a little while and then he's going to come back to New Orleans and everything, which is good. Got to get a little bit of rest in there. But in terms of his kicking percentage from last year, when it came down to total field goals, he made 75% of his field goals, which was better than not even 71.4. That was a couple years ago. It was much better than what they were getting out of Blake Grupe before the Saints ended up moving on from him. And so now Charlie Smyth, who now has the feel of what it's like to kick in an NFL game, to kick clutch kicks in an NFL game as well, to live up in clutch moments in the NFL as well, now owns tied the record for most field goals in Saints history in a single game. Like, he's done a lot of things in his, limited exposure and few games in which he got, opportunities to go out there and kick throughout the 2025 season. Coming back here in 2026, he should be even better. And with 6 games of experience now under his belt, he's obviously going to be somebody that's going to have a big role for New Orleans. Now, expect the Saints to bring in a kicker in training camp. They always do. Every team does. You want 2 kickers. You want 2 punters. You don't want one kicker kicking all training camp. You're going to end up killing their leg. And so expect that to mean that there will be some competition for him. But outside of that competition, if Charlie Smyth comes out on top at the end of training camp to be that kicker again, I expect an even better, more impressive, and very exciting season for him ahead in 2026. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to go into some of the don't forget about me players, like tight end Moliki Matavao, who could be stepping into a big role in 2026. We got that coming up for you tomorrow. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a party day part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.